the legendary middleweight champion Harry Greb may well be the greatest fighter that's ever lived. Greb undeniably has the greatest resume the sport's ever seen, defeating the most Hall of Famers in history, ranging from welterweight all the way to heavyweight. His work rate in taking fights and the amount of punches he'd throw were absolutely phenomenal, and his dominance in his prime years were amongst the greatest ever achieved by any boxer in history. This little series of videos on Greb is going to dig into all the reasons why he might have a claim as the greatest boxer of all time, and I'm going to start with his unbelievable resume. Greb scored 33 victories against Hall of Famers, defeating 16 different Hall of Famers amongst those fights, which is the highest in history. To put that into context against today's superstars, he has 20 more victories against Hall of Famers than both Mayweather and Pacquiao. In total, Greb had 48 fights against International Boxing Hall of Famers. Now before we dig into these names, it's important to know that there's no footage of Harry Greb fighting that's still survived. The only footage we can see is some pretty awkward looking shadow boxing. However, we can see footage of the people that he beat handily, and you can see the level of quality of these fighters. Fighters like Gene Tunney, the man who defeated Jack Dempsey back-to-back to win the heavyweight title. Tunney only ever lost once in 80 plus fights in his career, and that was to Greb. The fact that Greb was a middleweight makes this even more impressive, especially as Tunney was hospitalised due to the beating he received from the hands of Greb. Greb had also defeated the legendary welterweight champion Mickey Walker in one of the most brutal fights of the 1920s. After one of the most punishing middleweight fights in history, Greb and Walker would fight again later that night in the streets. Just 2 weeks later, Greb defeated light heavyweight Hall of Famer Maxie Rosenbloom over 15 rounds. Greb consistently beat Hall of Famers at a rate that no one's been able to mimic since, including 6 victories against Hall of Famers battling Levinsky and Jeff Smith, as well as 4 victories against Tommy Loughran, 2 victories over Tommy Gibbons, and 3 victories over Leo Hawke. He also beat the legendary middleweight Tiger Flowers, as well as heavyweight Hall of Famers Kid Norfolk and Billy Misk. Greb defeated many of these men in his prime, where he was absolutely sensational and dominated in unprecedented fashion. Greb went a staggering 45-0 in just 1 year in 1919, where he beat many of these names. This 45-0 unbeaten streak would extend to 56-0 before he took a loss to Tommy Loughran. He would then go on another unbeaten streak of 50 plus fights, losing just once in over 100 times. To compare this to today's context, Greb was dominating across 5 weight divisions, fighting around 50 times a year and still not losing. He also never drew the colour line, which was extremely common in the 1920s. Many fighters would refuse to fight black fighters, but Greb gave every fighter a chance, no matter the colour of their skin. He was more than willing to fight fighters like Kid Zulu, Kid Norfolk, Tiger Flowers and Jack Blackburn. He even went as far as to standing outside of Tiger Flowers' door after he won the title to prevent any racial attacks from taking place. Greb even went as far as to personally taking Flowers to his train to make sure he boarded safely and that no attack would happen. He was as fearless as any fighter's ever been, and for many years, despite beating all of the great middleweights and even the champions, he would only get his rightful shot at the middleweight world title after having over 200 professional fights. During these years in which he wasn't able to get a middleweight title shot, he decided to go after the heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey. Despite only being a middleweight, Greb was consistently beating up the heavyweight contenders, and although a fight with Jack Dempsey never materialised, it's common knowledge that Greb handily beat up Jack Dempsey in a public sparring session. It was said that Greb had one of the most awkward styles you could ever wish to see, and he worked at an unbelievable rate, continuously throwing punches from all angles, over sometimes 15 and even 20 rounds. It wasn't uncommon for Greb to fight multiple times a week, as well as taking exhibitions that didn't go onto his record. His record is stated at 261 wins to just 18 defeats, 19 draws and just 49 knockouts. The fact that he wasn't a notable knockout puncher makes his resume more impressive, considering he was often fighting people far bigger than him and hospitalising them consistently. And it goes without saying that Greb was one of the toughest fighters to ever live, being stopped on just 2 separate occasions in 300 pro fights, one due to knockout and the other due to a broken arm during a fight. Which then takes me on to the amount of injuries Greb had to deal with throughout his 300 fight career, which is just mind-blowing. After reading his biography, in just the first half of his career, Greb suffered 2 broken hands, 2 broken noses, broken ribs, a broken arm, ligament damage in his ankle, multiple split lips, a boil on the forehead which became infected, he had multiple cuts in fights, an ear infection, he was run over by a car in England, and he split his head open in a Turkish bath. Also take into account the fact he had boils in 1919, career inactivity when he joined the Navy during the war, and there are many others towards the back end of his career. Most notably, becoming permanently blinded in one eye by Kid Norfolk, which Greb kept a secret until his death, meaning many of his biggest fights were fought with just one eye. He would have his final fight against Tiger Flowers, sadly passing away just months later. He was one of the wildest characters ever, and he packed more into his 32 years than many do in an entire lifetime. He quite literally dodged bullets when someone shot a gun at him, was often called to see off troublemakers in local bars, also beating up mobsters that offered to bribe him for fights, and famously drove like a maniac at crazy speeds. He would also lose his wife and a few of his siblings at an extremely young age. Eventually, his fast driving caught up with him and a car crash broke his nose. Greb would go to the hospital to receive nose surgery to repair the damage, but would sadly never wake up. He would die at just the age of 32 after a surgery went wrong. His great rival Tiger Flowers would similarly have a nose surgery the following year at 32 years old and would similarly pass away in the same circumstances.
Oh yeah. This is Harry Greb, Pittsburgh World Mill. He's not afraid of anybody. He'll fight anybody, black, white, big, small. And during the day he fought, he died in 1926. I never heard him say, a racial word to anybody. I never heard him say a derogatory word. Only to Irish guys, Irish say the words. But I never heard him say, but he was a mean guy. He'd fight anybody. He's one of my biggest heroes.
It didn't bother me because I always had my mind framed with the old fighters such as Harry Greb, Mickey Walker, and those kind of guys. These guys lived that kind of life. They didn't care about anything. They had one objective, and that was to just win. And I just wanted to win.